Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, re-recording a solo acoustic version of your album to juice your Spotify numbers, or else a scrappy upstart, re-recording an acoustic version of your album to boost your TikTok numbers, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of January 2023, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Todd with one D who drove one of those Land Rovers that says Discovery on the back, and who was always trying to sell you cheat codes to Call of Duty for hundreds of dollars. And old Todd with a D would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, and they just added custom landing pages for musicians. Additionally, this year Bandzoogle would like to congratulate its members on surpassing $100 million in commission-free sales through their website. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, you can check out my tour page, joepugmusic.com/tour, where there are a bevy of new tour dates posted all around the world, from London to Wolf Trap. Or you can find me the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. Go on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to all the people who have taken the time and the capital to support the show over there at Patreon. And if you're not in a position to help the show out in that way, there's still a couple ways that you can help the show for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. It was a pleasure and an honor to speak with Miss Holly Knight last month, and I hope you dig our conversation. Our guest this week is a songwriting luminary who has been writing chart-topping hits since the 1980s. Holly Knight began her career as a band member of Device and Spider before branching out into writing for other artists. She has written for and with Pat Benatar, Tina Turner, Heart, Aerosmith, Rod Stewart, Bon Jovi, and many others. Her songs have appeared in the movies Mad Max, Thelma and Louise, and a host of others, and also on the popular television shows American Idol, Family Guy, The Simpsons, South Park, 30 Rock, Saturday Night Live, and many more. Tina Turner and Pat Benatar both won Grammys performing her songs. She's a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame and a 13-time recipient of an ASCAP Award. I got a chance to catch up with her on the phone last month to hear about her journey so far. Ms. Holly Knight, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. It is an honor to have you here. Many people who come on this show, they describe their early life in music like they kind of fell into it or they found it maybe in their teenage years. From what I can tell, that is not the case for you at all. Music seems like it was a part of your life from a very early age. Can you describe some of your earliest memories of music in your life?
Well, I was 4 when I actually started taking formal piano lessons, and I studied classical for 10 years. And, really music was my first language, to be honest, and probably still is. My mother was taking piano lessons, and I used to sort of listen to her, and I would play on any surface I could. I'd play on my legs, I'd play on the walls, and I was wishing that it could be me that was taking the piano lessons. And every time she would walk away, she wasn't very good, but every time do you want me to silence that noise that's coming from the computer?
If possible, yeah. I can take a lot of stuff out in post, but if you can stop it, that'd be great. But don't worry about it. I'll take care of most of the audio stuff. Just,
right. Sure. You're going to edit this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go back to what I was saying. So my mother was taking piano lessons, and she wasn't very good, and she would go in the kitchen after she was done practicing, and I would sneak in the living room, and I would climb up on the bench and pick out the tune she was trying to play by ear. And after a while, she thought, maybe she's the one that got the music talent, and she asked me if I wanted to take piano lessons, and I just screamed at the top of my lungs, yes, and that's, pretty much from there. I've never looked back.
When you say that music was sort of a first language for you, can you describe what that feels like? Is it just the ability to be able to hear a melody and play it back immediately, or is it something deeper and more diffuse than that?
I think they're kind of the same thing, really. I mean, there's certain things that you can be taught, and you can definitely take theory and musical training, but you can't teach someone to have a good ear. Their skills can definitely get better, but my ear was so good that when I was studying piano, I would fake reading the music. I could kind of read it, but it was too hard. So once I would remember the tune in my head, I would pretend I was reading the music, which in a way was kind of dumb because now my sight reading is awful. But my ear is very good, and I have perfect pitch. And that's just something you're born with, And as far as the what it did to me spiritually, it just, I don't know. It seemed like I'd been to that place before. Like probably if you believe in, the spirit and coming back in different forms, I probably have always been at the core of my soul, very creative,
That makes sense. I think it's the reason that most music that we love, the first time you hear a song that you love, you tend to have the feeling that you've always known that song in a certain way.
Right. Well, there's only really 12 notes in music.
Right. So with that, you say that was your first language and you were just fluent in it from a very early age. How did that translate to just being a kid in your social life as a kid? Were you very fluent in music and then you had a hard time, speaking regular language with kids your age, or was that not a problem for you?
Sure. Well, I actually wrote about that in my memoir, I Am the Warrior. I did have an unusual childhood because of that. My mother, when she recognized that I had been born with this talent, she started pounding me and grooming me to be a concert pianist. She decided that's who you're going to be. And because of that, I had to bring home 2 report cards. So it wasn't good enough to come home with she was an overachiever anyway. Or I became the overachiever who she vicariously lived through, where I had to have a good report card from school. And I also had to have a good report card from my music school and my music lessons. And as a result, I wasn't allowed to have children, friends come over. I didn't really have a lot of friends, and I learned how to sort of spend a lot of time on my own, satisfying certain needs and stuff. But it was hard because I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers. I sort of, that I realized later on in life that was something that I really needed, was friendships with women, because I didn't really have that when I was young. And there was a lot of pressure tied to the point where at some point, and again, I write about this in my book, something that was so joyful for me, my mother had turned into a, like more of a chore and a responsibility. And so that made me very rebellious. And then I discovered rock music, and the louder the better. So that explains a lot of some of the lyrical content as I got older, what I was writing about.
How did you integrate those two kind of competing signals? On the one hand, you have, the joy of playing music. You say you feel like you found a spiritual home where you'd always been. You have that on the one hand, and then you have what sounds like very intense pressure from a maternal figure to please them through your accomplishments in this. How did those two competing, one of those sounds like a very positive thing, and one of those sounds like a very difficult thing to live through. How did you balance those two things?
Well, it's interesting, but I truly believe that adversity is not the enemy. It's really a gift, because it causes you to want to be better and rise above, so I basically turned it around and used it to learn how to survive and how to be a fighter. I had some very dark periods with my mother. And as a result, I became a fighter. And then without even realizing it, as I got older and I started to write songs, my ethos was about fighting for the things that I deserved and wanted, because I had an interviewer who said to me, and again, I don't mean to repeat myself, but it's in the book. The book's really good because it explains a lot of this, and in fact, the dedication says to anybody who ever had a dream and was told no, this is for you, because that was me. So it just made me work that much harder to get where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And this interviewer had said to me, why are so many of your songs about fighting? And I thought, well, they're not really. And then after the interview, I went and looked at the titles, and there was The Warrior and Invincible and Better Be Good to Me, and Love is a Battlefield. And I realized, he was right. He was absolutely right. But it wasn't about fighting with someone. It was more about fighting for things. And I think that became something that, as the years went on, people related to, and my audience, especially with women and empowerment, that need to stand up and roar. I was fulfilling that need not only for myself, but for fans and other people that were going through it.
What was the initial point of divergence then from you're starting out, you're on this classical piano route, this concert pianist route that your mother wanted you to do, and then now you obviously have ended up where you are, and you're making this music for yourself, and you're making this music for your fans as a means of empowerment. What was that initial point of divergence where you took that left turn from the path of classical piano to where you are now?
Well, it's kind of funny because when I wrote Love is a Battlefield, they made this video. It was the first video ever made where they had talking on it. And after that, it became a thing. The same director went on and did Thriller, and that had some talking in it as well. And I remember when I saw that video, it kind of gave me chills, and I wasn't sure at first why. And then I realized that was me. Because what happened was when I was 15, I ran away from home. And when I ran away from home, I was completely on my own. I had no idea what was going to happen next. And except that I wanted to be in a band. I had already decided I want to be a rock star. I want to be in a band. I didn't know yet that I wanted to focus on songwriting. I just wanted to make music. I wanted to be up there performing, and I wanted to do it on my terms. And it took many years to get to that point, but I was only 15. So, by the time I figured it out, I was still younger than most.
Indeed. And so that first band where you really, where you begin to live that dream, you joined the band Spider in the early 80s. How did you end up joining that band, and what was the initial experience like?
Well, I went back to New York after I had left home after 3 or 4 years. I moved back to New York to sort of confront my demons and my family, and to really sort of take my career by the horns and actually focus on doing something about it. And it was just interesting. I started networking. I started going out all the times and sneaking into concerts and backstage to meet people. And I mean, it sounds like, oh, that was a lot of fun and partying, but it was actually, I was still on my own. So it was a very, lonesome time for me. But little by little, I made friends, and I met someone who introduced me to what was going to be the future band, Spider. They weren't a band yet. We all kind of formed the band together. I was also one of the original people. And I just met Keith, the guitarist, Keith Lenton, and Anton Fig, the drummer. And we just started talking. I went to a show that they had done, and someone introduced us and said, oh, Holly's a great keyboard player. You should put her in your band that you're trying to put together. And that's really literally what happened. And from that point on, it became more of a professional level of, everything that I was doing. We all had the same goal, which was to write original material, get a record deal, go on tour, and dominate the world. We did everything but the last one.
Fair enough. So many people in rock and pop music in particular are so much about three chords and the truth, and they almost take it as like a badge of honor of how little they know about their instrument. Did you find, because of your years' experience training on piano, that you could really hang with people musically in that world because of that?
Oh, yeah. To be honest, without pumping myself up too much, there were many times I actually felt superior on a musical level because I did have the training. And all I had to do was sort of sit down and play for a little bit, and they would shut right up,
Right.
Better to show than to tell. And but I will say this, I do a lot of writing on guitar and bass because I don't play those instruments well. I probably could have learned after all these years how to play them well, but I purposely didn't want to know. Like, I could very easily sit down and say, okay, this is an E string. I know if I move it up half a fret, it's going to be F. And I move it up another half a step, it's going to be F sharp. And I could sit there. I could have taught myself where all the notes were and everything, but I kind of like that I didn't know. And it put me on that level that you were just talking about, because sometimes when you don't know, you're more open about what you write. You just sort of go where your spirit tells you to go, or your fingers tell you to go. Whereas when I write on piano, I write much more complicated stuff. Yeah, and two of the big songs I've had are two chords.
Right. Do you find yourself, when you're writing in a mode like that on an instrument, that when you're less a fish swimming in water, do you find yourself using your ears more than you do when you're writing on piano?
I don't know if it's my ears I use. I think there's something inside of me that I use. I kind of describe it in the book as akin to a Ouija board, how you have that, there's a heart-shaped piece of wood, and it's called a planchet. And I wrote about this in my book. You put your fingers on it, and you just let it lead you to where it wants you to go. Now, of course, there's the theory, these days, that if the Ouija board was just people moving the thing around, but they were still inspired by some other force or energy, whether they know it or not. And so it's not a defined thing. And it's sort of the same thing happens if I put my fingers on a guitar or the keyboard or bass. My fingers start moving, and there's something inside of me that moves with it. I mean, a lot of people have sort of compared it to like, oh, that just ran right through me. That song wrote itself, and I was just a catalyst, but I don't agree with that. I think it's a partnership. I think it's something inside of you and everything that you know and you've experienced, and then you're tapping into the ether. And it's not a conscious thing. And if I talk too much about it, it's like when you have a dream and you try and remember it, and then the minute you try to make sense of it, it slips from your fingers. It's kind of like that. So I don't really want to describe it too much, but that's kind of what it's like.
I love the analogy of the Ouija board, because I think it does get to exactly what you're talking about there, which is you are channeling something, but at the same time, you've had experiences in your life that make them specific to you. I guess my question would be, to continue with your analogy there of the Ouija board, I'll ask a question within that analogy. As you're finding it move, the piece is moving, because you have to know where it's going to stop and know that that's the final resting place. Do you have to be in a place in your life spiritually or personally where there's sort of a quiet in your spirit or a quiet in your heart so that you can really listen? Have you reached points in your life where there's been too much going on, or there's been too much noise for you to know the right places where the Ouija board is stopping?
No, not really. In fact, the more noise, the better for me, because I write very dramatic songs. And I don't, probably, it's like I said before, it's the adversity that gets you to the next place. I mean, if you look at the Olympics, every year they beat the record before because they know just psychologically that this is what it was last year. If I push that much harder, I'm going to get to this place. And it just shows you, I guess I use that analogy because it just shows you what the mind is capable of when it's pushed, So I think that good or bad, rest or unrest, I think my best stuff comes out of turmoil and, meaningful experiences. I mean, the ones where I'm at rest, that's just like eating ice cream and enjoying the ride, It's like, who wants to write about anything at that point? Unless you're going to write about something incredibly positive. And I've probably only done that a few times in my career where I wrote something that was just 100% positive and celebratory, and it ended up being my biggest song, which was the best.
Wow. Do you find yourself then, if you tend to work best in that kind of tumultuous world, have you found yourself personally almost seeking turmoil in a way to remain vital and creative?
I used to a lot more. I don't need to anymore so much. But then again, I'm writing different kind of songs these days than probably when I was younger. I mean, if I was my age and still writing about, we will be invincible and all that, it would be almost anticlimactic. That's part of being young and rebellious. And we all have a natural progression as we get older where we hopefully get wiser. Some of us get stupider. Maybe it's a combination of both, or you just keep doing the same things over and over and you just never really change, or whatever the dynamic is, Lately, I've been sort of, I'm a mother. I have 2 grown sons. I kind of am more observant these days, more like a witness looking at like the youth of today. Like I just wrote a fantastic song with another writer, Charlie Midnight, called Normal for a Day. And just kind of commenting on the youth. It's like, if we weren't so outrageous and this and that, would you love me if I was just normal, And that's sort of like a parental thing, but it's one of the best songs I've written, but it's just sort of, I guess, where I'm at in my I guess, maturity.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, talk to me then about a different time. I'm really interested in this period of your life. You're in Spider, you're based in New York City, and then you have this major move in your life across coast. You head to Los Angeles, where you still reside now, all these years later. My understanding is that you were urged by Mike Chapman to come out there and work specifically as a songwriter. Can you describe what was the impetus for that move? Because that's a big move, not only from New York to LA, but also from working in a band to specifically songwriting. Can you speak to that period in your life and what drew you to that major change?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is all stuff that's in my book. And that's a very big part of it, because when I really don't cover a whole lot in the beginning of my early years. I cover one chapter, and I kind of refer to that as my film noir years, because it was New York and it was gritty, black and white and all that. And that's still very much a part of who I am. I may have lived in California for 30 something years, but I am, in my DNA, I am stuck in being a New Yorker,
Fair enough.
And then when I moved to California, I referred to it as Fuji color, because it was so different. It was so explosive. And what happened was I had done 2 records with Spider, and I was really started to develop and realizing actually pretty good at it. And the band wasn't happy about that. I mean, they should have been, because it was only going to help us. But there was a lot of jealousy and competitiveness in the band. Everybody wanted to be a writer, and that happens a lot in many bands, And I thought, well, I should be writing more in a situation where I'm being, nurtured and encouraged to do this. So I was thinking of leaving the band, and I spoke to Mike Chapman, who was he was the head of the record company we had signed to. And he was known for being a brilliant, he was successful as a producer and a songwriter, but he also started his own label. And that's how my relationship started with him, because we got signed to Dreamland Records. And I thought he was going to be upset that I was leaving the band, because I thought, oh, they put all this in the band. And he actually encouraged, you know what? Move to California and take a publishing deal so you'll have some money to live on. We'll do lots of writing together, because we had a mad chemistry together. We'd already written Better Be Good to Me, which was soon we didn't know it at the time, but it was about to become the second single on Tina Turner's Private Dancer record. And he said, and if I'm not writing with you, I'll introduce you to other writers. If I need a song for a record and they don't come up with it, you'll have a direct line into a project. So he said, so move out here. And in addition, marrying him years later, but he ended up, at the time, he was an engineer, so it was pretty perfect. He was the head engineer at a recording studio named The Village, which is a really, state-of-the-art studio in Santa Monica. So I had a perfect setup. I had a place to do the most amazing demos for free, because I lived with the head engineer, and I would go to Mike's house and write. And I don't even think at the time it still hadn't dawned on me. This is what I do. I'm a songwriter. It took a few times for it to really sink in. And then I never looked back at that point. Every time I tried to do another project, I would do it, and I would do it well, but then I would kind of abandon it and go back to songwriting. So I always kind of felt like, no, songwriting is really the draw for me.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter, because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Holly speaks lucidly and insightfully on the role that her parents played in her musical development, particularly her mother. Our parents and their legacy affect every aspect of our lives, and creativity is no different. And those effects are more often than not a mixed bag, a shade of gray, a ledger with marks on both sides. There's a wonderful poem by Faith Sheeran that explores that balance, which is entitled, "My Father Watched Westerns." He couldn't get enough of them, those dusty landscapes on the other side of the screen, men on horses seeking justice or revenge. All through my life, if he was tired, I would find him in a dark room full of gunfire. His movie titles included words like lone and lonesome, though mostly families stuck together, and young men learned to risk their lives for whatever was noble or right. I could not sit through them. Women were left behind in saloons with hair and dresses as soft as pillows, their possibilities perfumed by estrogen. But it was the men my father was watching. They had wide hats and leather boots, masks made of betrayal. My father remembered the dangerous people he faced in courtrooms, his arguments like bullets. His mind was full of places that were not yet settled, places where law was new. A man had a horse, a few friends, some deep internal compass. People relied on him. What he needed most was courage. My father related to this. He knew, after all, how the West was won. Were there some, like just on a technical level, were there lessons that you had to learn in songwriting when you got out to Los Angeles? Like, were there any deficiencies in what you were doing that you had to get up to speed at as a writer?
I don't know if they were so much deficiencies as something I hadn't spent enough time on, and that would probably be on the lyrical side. Okay. The lyrical side was, the lyrical side is always harder for most writers. Unless you have a writer, now they call it top line, and if that's all they do, that's all they do. But if you're the kind of writer that you write both music and lyrics, and I always encourage everybody to do both. I've taught master classes, and even if someone doesn't think they're a writer, it's like, hey, you have something to say, just write it down in free form first. Just write down what you're thinking like you would in a journal. Everybody has something to say, I think that my lyrics over the years have definitely gotten, stronger. And one thing that Chapman taught me, he was my mentor, really. So I really looked up to him, although musically I was much more sophisticated than him. And he loved that. He always said I had killer bass lines. I write a lot from the bass, or the bass lines. And, I think I taught him some things too. But, there is the part that you're born with that you cannot teach someone. There's also the craft of songwriting, and there's definitely tools that you can learn. Now, I was never taught them, but somehow when I decided that I was going to teach master classes, I had to find a way to articulate to other people my logic and reasoning of why I do these things. And that's when I started to realize, okay, there are things you can teach people, and I'm doing it sort of on autopilot, but they make a lot of sense. And one of them, which I would say to other songwriters, people that want to write, is arrangements. I think people don't understand arrangements at all when it comes to songwriting. So they don't really understand that each part has a purpose. And if you're not fulfilling that purpose, you're not completing the song. For instance, there's the verse, there's the chorus, what are their roles? And why do you need a bridge? What does a bridge accomplish if you're going to put one in there? Things like that, Those are the sort of things that you can teach someone, and they'll become better writers because of it. I've taught enough people where they don't even have a chorus, and I'll say to them, where's your chorus? What is it you're trying to say? What's your point? Your verse is supposed to sort of set the groundwork about what you're about to say. What's your big statement when you get to the chorus? Because I don't hear it. I have no idea what the song's about. And they'll go, oh. And they'll kind of laugh and go, yeah, I guess you're right. And I'll say, go back and write a chorus.
If each one of those parts of the song needs to have a purpose and a function, in your opinion, what is the overall purpose and function of a song? Like, what are the sum of those trying to accomplish?
Just to write a great song, something that people want to hear, and a lot of times they'll want to sing along with it, but they'll want to hear it over and over. And then over time, it becomes the soundtrack to their life, where it takes them back like no other sense, where they can remember so vividly what they were experiencing or feeling when they heard this song and what it represented to them in their life, That's if you're going to write for a living, and if you're going to, make music for other people to hear. I think also the purpose of music is just this, to enjoy yourself and feel joyful or whatever the emotions are, even if it's misery. Anybody can be a musician. No one said you have to do it for a living. You know what I mean? People can do it just for their hobby or their enjoyment. And that's really the purest place to come from. And if you're lucky enough, you go, oh, I'm good at this. Maybe I can make a living doing that. Great. But I think too many people think, well, if I can't be professional at it, I shouldn't bother with it. And that's ridiculous.
I agree. It seems to me like the first song to break through for you, that was Love is a Battlefield, yes?
Yes, it was about the same time. I also had another song called Change.
Yes.
A John Waite cut. And I think that might have come out a little bit before Battlefield, but Battlefield was the breakthrough one because it was so massive, and still is.
What did that feel like on a personal level? I mean, to me, outside looking in, that seems like the ultimate vindication. You make this huge left turn from the life that your mom had chosen from you. You make this huge left turn from this band that you put together in New York. You moved to LA, you bet on yourself. And this seems like, again, just looking at the whole narrative myself, outside looking in, it seems like a huge vindication. What did it feel like as that song started to take off?
It was amazing to think these things really happen. It's like you have these fantasies or you have these dreams, and then something happens and you go, oh my God, this is really happening, you know? And then I think the big realization would be when it would come on the radio, and it was coming on the radio at least 5-6 times a day if I was driving around. You know, LA is a town you drive in, so I would hear it a lot. And I would just want to shout out the window to anybody, like, that's my song. But of course I didn't, because I would have looked like a crazy person. But I just felt really good, you know? I mean, it's one thing to, to be making music in your bedroom, but then when it gets sort of put out on the radio, it's like it has a ripple effect. And then all of a sudden it's reaching out to so many people, and to have them respond to it in a favorable way, it was just like, it was mind blowing. And it was just amazing. I mean, there's nothing like success. I mean, whether people say, oh, you know, people are materialistic or they care too much about ambitions and success, I say that's bullshit. You know, it's success only spurs you on to want to do more, you know, and it's very hard to be successful. I saw this amazing interview the other day with Howard Stern and Bruce Springsteen, and he was saying something that I'm really glad he said this, because sometimes I have to remind myself, that I'm one of those people that it's very, very hard to be in a band and just even get to play in clubs. And it's even harder to be in a band and write original material and then to get signed. And then out of the few bands that get signed, it's even harder to, if you're lucky, you get a song on the radio, maybe once, you know, and then to get beyond that, it's like, it just gets harder and harder. And yet somehow I just kept going and going, and I was pulled by some force that was just pushing me on, you know. Sometimes, you know, I said this in the book, sometimes it felt like things just landed in my lap. And it wasn't that I wasn't working hard or anything, it's just that what are the odds, you know? So when these things happen, I sort of felt like I must be doing something right, because the universe is aiding and abetting me in this. It's like there's not these struggles. Like I've had other struggles in my life where no amount of pushing and prodding would make it happen, you know, like with relationships, for instance. It just wasn't meant to be. But this was like, all I had to do was follow the yellow brick road, and it was taking me there, you know. This energy, it was like undeniable. And that's why I wrote so many songs during that period. You know, this book is centric on the MTV years. And I really focused from 1980 to 1990. And that's when I wrote my biggest song. And then afterwards, you know, I just basically write a little bit at the end, after the book is over, about, you know, what I've done with my life. But it's really focused on that time, because it was just amazing how many covers and how many things and adventures and relationships I built. And, you know, it was just an incredible amount of energy, and I just really tapped into it, you know. Not to say that I haven't since then. I mean, I've done a lot of things since then, but that was just a very special time. I mean, the whole world changed as we got into the 90s and things got more serious. MTV was over. I started writing more for movies and TV, and I've always had covers, but there was just something about that period that I was on fire.
That's a beautiful thing. I mean, to what degree do you think, you describe it as, well, things were falling in my lap at a certain point, but don't you think that that's a function of things fall in your lap when you've muscled yourself directly into the position where you should be in life?
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't standing still. I would do this and it would take off. That would lead me to something else. And then I would, I was constantly networking and meeting people, and I was just out there, and then after that, I wanted to have a family. So that slowed me down a little bit. Then I tried to move to Connecticut. Actually, I did move to Connecticut, but I hated it. I was there for like 3 years and moved back to California. I said, no, and I was right the first time.
Fair enough.
But so when I came back, I just started working again and then worked more in my career. But it's really important, you think you're going to move out of an area where there's a lot of energy and whatever your career is, and you think, oh, I can move in the middle of nowhere and we have the internet and I can work just as easily. And that's actually, for me, it wasn't true, because I think you need to, I keep talking about the word energy this morning, but I think you need to be in a place where there is in-person networking. I mean, obviously that's changed with the pandemic, but if you move to like the mountains, say in Montana, it's not the same as if you're in town and you're going to see this band and you're going to have dinner with this person and you're going to say, oh, let's go in the studio tomorrow. And there's definitely something better about writing in the same room as opposed to the idea of writing on Zoom is so strange to me.
Yes. Well, I mean, not just songwriting, but this whole idea that post-pandemic, we're going to move everything onto Zoom. It's like, that's just not how human beings work. I mean, you got to be in the same room. You spoke earlier at the start of this about, music being a language for you. Well, there's a lot of physical language that happens between people in a room. And yeah, I can't imagine all of this moving to Zoom going forward.
Yeah.
What did you have to learn? I mean, you're on this roller coaster ride from, like you mentioned, your book focuses on this period of time from early 80s to the early 90s. You're on this roller coaster ride creatively. That's really working for you. What did you have to learn on the business end to keep things like fruitful and to keep you in the game? Because, you mentioned that Springsteen interview. He said, it's this really narrow road you have to walk through creatively to make it that far. And he's right. But it's also a really narrow road financially to make it that way. I know of a lot of artists who are amazing artists who, they couldn't keep on having a career because they couldn't make the business thing work. So what did you have to learn on the business end to, remain successful for so long?
Well, in the beginning, I had a very prominent attorney who told me I should sign my deal that I did with my publisher, and that was Mike. And I didn't realize it at the time because he didn't sit down and tell me this, but I gave all my copyrights away, 100%. So it took me years to realize that, to even know what a copyright is. So, for those that are starting out and trying to figure out, well, how do I find out about the business? Well, there's some very good books out there, and you should do reading and educate yourself, especially now that we have the internet and everything. There's no reason why you shouldn't educate yourself. We didn't have that back then.
Totally.
And, it took years of making some mistakes and just, talking to the right people. And then I just became more savvy. I mean, the more I started making the money, the more I wanted to hold on to it. So I learned about, I bought a home. When I was 26, I bought my first house in Bel Air. And from that point on, I just started to educate myself more. And I was very fortunate because I actually met someone who became my business manager. And she's still my business manager to this day. Her name is Tina Fassbender. I was her first client, and now she has a stable of some of the top songwriters and mixers like Chris Lord Alge and other producers and songwriters. But I'm glad to say that I trust her with my life, and she has never ripped me off. And I've heard so many stories. I mean, she's ethical. Maybe it's because she's a woman. I don't know. But she's super smart, too, razor smart. I like to line myself up with really smart people, including women. And I was lucky because I hear those stories, but whether it's Billy Joel or so many people that just got so ripped off by their business managers. Well, she helped me. And then I got in, I started putting together a portfolio when I was 30, and building, my retirement fund. So, and you have to do that because when you're self-employed, you don't have someone taking money out and socking it away from you for you. So you really, and the other thing is you wouldn't get a business manager unless you were making X amount of money anyway. So at the very least, I tell everybody, make sure that if you're a songwriter, that you pay your taxes and go to H&R Blocks or someone so you never get audited. And, try not to go crazy spending money when you get your first big check. I did a few things. I bought a Maserati with my first big check.
Yeah.
But, you need to calm down and not just go crazy when you start to make money.
Did that drive you crazy a little bit, that initial deal you had given up those copyrights, like once you figured it out, or did you come to peace with it?
Well, yes and no. I came to peace with it because what I got in return was a great mentor,
Yeah.
and he was a great publisher. I mean, his company got a lot of covers for me. But then it reached a point, then we started co-publishing together. But then, I matured, the mentor grows up, and sometimes, not the mentor, the protege grows up, and the mentor doesn't necessarily like that because the relationship changed. Now you're equals, or at least I felt that way. Anyway, I ended up going with another publishing company, it was EMI. And they just offered me a better deal because it was what they call an administration deal where I got to keep all my publishing. But not only that, it's all worked out in the end anyway, because I've gotten all those copyrights back, or I'm in the process of getting some. I got back Love is a Battlefield and The Warrior and Better Be Good to Me and Obsession. And they've all come back to me because after 35 years, there's a law that intellectual property, you can get it back. You don't even have to buy it back. They have to give it to you if you get an attorney and you write them a letter. It's a law. So I was able to get those back. And now because 80s music is so popular, I get so many covers in movies and TV shows that it's like, thank God, it's a new source of income. I told Steven Tyler about that. He didn't know about it. So I'm sure he got his back as well.
And you can tell them, hey, man, I told you about this. Now give me 10% of what you get. So right. Did your mom, with all this success that you had in the 80s into now, did your mom, who wanted you to take this different route very early on, did she get to experience and see your success? And what was your relationship with her once you had kind of been vindicated in your own path?
Well, that's complicated. Mm-hmm. My mother was a complicated person. So on the one hand, I think she was proud of me. And on the other, I that's a long conversation that I can't really get into right now.
I got you.
My dad was incredibly proud of me. My dad was the opposite. My dad, he was a doctor, and he used to come to every dive and see me play. And I remember when I was in Spider, we played at the Joe Louis Arena, which was a big deal. And we were opening for Alice Cooper, and he flew with my brother to see me. And I could just see how proud he was. I have other members of my family. Like I took my brother to see the opening, the premiere of the Tina musical on Broadway. And when they got to the best and everybody stood up, and across the aisle, there's Oprah and all these celebrities singing every word to the best. I looked at my brother, and I'd never seen that look on his face before. He was just grinning. I'd never seen him so happy. He just looked really proud of me. And that meant so much to me. That was pretty awesome.
Well, that's the whole thing. The thought of your brother grinning there, or just the memory of your father and him traveling out to that special show. I mean, that is a different type of coin that is more valuable than
you care more. Absolutely. All those years, I wanted my mother to be proud of me. I wanted her to I desperately wanted, and I don't know why to this day why it was so important to me, but that's how you are, as kids. And I had the same thing with my kids. It's like just making your parents proud. I don't know why it's so important, but it is.
It is. It is. Listen, it has been an honor to have you on the show, a complete privilege. I'm a huge fan. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. And if you want to know more about my story, I also have an audiobook that came out the same day that the book came out. So that's on Audible, and I narrated it myself. And the book is called I Am the Warrior, My Crazy Life Rocking the MTV 80s. My Crazy Life Writing the Hits. Sorry, don't even know the title to my own book. Writing the Hits and Rocking the MTV 80s. And you can get it on any book platform.
Perfect. Well, Holly Knight, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter Podcast.
You're welcome.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Holly Knight's autobiography is entitled I Am the Warrior, available from Simon & Schuster. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.